Hi, welcome back to the Ranch Monarch. I know I haven't posted in a while, so it's good to be back. Today we'll be reading Scent of a Woman by Devereux's Disease. Summary. After the fall, Will assumed he and Hannibal would progress into a romantic relationship. So when Hannibal comes home smelling of fancy perfume, Will is distressed. How do serial killers handle jealousy and romantic confessions? Not well, y'all. Not well. Will sat in front of the fire, nursing his whiskey and contemplating the ways he would kill Hannibal Lecter. He smiled. Some things, apparently, never changed. Will took another pull from the glass, watching as the flames consumed another piece of birch and cursing every choice he'd made since tipping Hannibal and himself into the sea. He'd chosen to pull Hannibal from the water, and when he surfaced and the doctor hadn't. He'd chosen to beat on Hannibal's chest, threats and pleas spilling from his lips as he sought mercy from any god he could think of. He'd chosen to break into that little pharmacy in North Carolina, bashing the clerk in the skull and fleeing with all the medicine and first aid kits he could carry. He'd chosen to stitch up his wounds himself, sewing a scarecrow smile onto his face haphazardly so he could focus on Hannibal's injuries. He'd chosen to spend long nights watching as Hannibal's pallor grew, holding the doctor's hand when the fever nearly took him twice. He made every choice so carefully, calculating for the chance, the fleeting promise that somewhere, some way, there was peace for them in the future. What Hannibal hadn't counted on was Hannibal making choices of his own. First, Hannibal had chosen a safe house with 2 bedrooms. Then he'd chosen to reveal their identities as business associates. There had been months of dinners, formal affairs with plenty of philosophical debate and absolutely no footsie at the table. When Will got drunk and blurted out that he missed sex, Hannibal had chosen to let the empath wake up alone with a glass of water and 2 aspirin as his only consolation. He'd made his peace with Hannibal's choices. At least Will thought he had. But the most recent one was him debate fishing the doctor from the frigid waters of the Atlantic. Hannibal was choosing to go out at night. At first, Will thought he might be hunting, but when Hannibal returned, he made no mention of a new target for their table. Will had waited in the study, fire stoked and body tense as Hannibal crossed the foyer to hang up his coat and scarf. He ducked his head into the room briefly, offering Will a wan smile. "I find myself rather spent. If you don't mind, I'll see you in the morning." He was gone before Will could answer, but something churned in the empath's gut. Hannibal always read by the fire before bed. He always asked Will about his day. Something else was wrong, and Will closed his eyes to focus on what had made his blood run cold. It was the hair. Hannibal's hair had fallen into his eyes, little tufts sticking up in the back. There was no wind to ruffle the strands, which meant someone's hands had likely been through the carefully gelled coif. God, he hoped Hannibal had been in a fight. Will was moving before he finished the thought, running to the foyer to scent Hannibal's coat and scarf like a dog. He prayed for the scent of blood or viscera, something, anything other than the picture his mind had begun constructing. There was no coppery tang of blood in the air, just the light, smooth scent of jasmine. The delicate aroma choked Will. Perfume. The exact perfume someone like Bedelia would choose to spray delicately on their hair and décolletage. The same perfume Hannibal probably inhaled when he was fucking Alana, a scent that would never belong on someone with scruffy curls and a 5 o'clock shadow. The scent grew stronger in the following week as Hannibal's appearance grew more disheveled. He went out almost every night, returning later and later with his clothes in disarray and a small, tired smile on his face. "Don't go out tonight," Will mumbled over coffee one morning, the steam from the mug camouflaging the heat in his cheeks. "Why?" Hannibal didn't look up from the newspaper. Will felt himself heat further. He wouldn't beg. He'd kill them all before he begged. "The late nights are taking a toll. You look old." Will spat, leaving just as Hannibal deemed to regard him over the edge of the paper. Will began to scour Hannibal's laundry for clues. He found smears of lipstick on Hannibal's shirts, fine tears at the seams and the sleeves that made my pointed feminine nails, no doubt. One jacket had what seemed to be teeth marks in the shoulder. Will boiled with rage. Hannibal had ruined him and saved him, only to throw him away for some jasmine-scented chippy with snaggleteeth. Something had to be done. So now Will sat in the study, the warmth of fire eluding him as he considered one question. What would Hannibal do? Will touched a hand to his head, fingers seeking out the puckered line on his forehead. He flexed his abs just to feel the smile Hannibal had given him stretch. Hannibal had been very clear when it came to matters of the love. If you hesitated in offering your heart, it would be cut from your body. The tracker had been easier to plant than Will had expected. Hannibal spent the afternoon primping in the bathroom for his jasmine-scented harpy, affording Will plenty of time to slip the small tile under the passenger side doormat. When Will checked his phone, the signal was good. Now, all he had to do was wait. When Hannibal breezed out the door, Will offered him a small wave from the study. He listened for the car and then sprang from his chair. Pulling on a pair of running shoes, Will paused by the knife block in the kitchen. A butcher knife seemed too flashy, but Will had a point to make. He chose a boning knife, something elegant but capable of leaving a scar, just like the man he had intended to mark. He was fairly certain he'd let Hannibal survive the night, but he was still debating carving Will into the doctor's forehead. Will had checked his phone and frowned. The tracker showed that Hannibal's car was stopped a few streets over. Will tapped his phone, then tried refreshing the GPS connection. The dot didn't move. Either Hannibal was banging a bored housewife in the neighborhood, or Will could very well be leaving an angry 1-star review on Amazon. Frowning at his phone, Will opened the kitchen door and walked into the yard. If he cut through the woods, he could be at Hannibal's location in minutes. He tested the weight of the boning knife as brush pulled at his clothes. When reaching the clearing, Will kept to the brambles, peering into a sleepy cul-de-sac. 2 houses were built. One seemed vacant, but Hannibal's car was parked at the mouth of the development, under a streetlight. Will squinted when he saw movement in the car. He had expected to see 2 bodies entwined as windows heated, but instead he saw Hannibal, very much alone, adjusting a book. Careful to stay in the shadows of the tree line, Will crept closer to the car. Hannibal's window was down, the cool night air ruffling the pages of the book. Will had made sure to keep downwind of the cannibal. It wouldn't do to be spotted before Hannibal's paramour arrived. Will settled into the bush and waited. And waited. After nearly 3 hours of watching Hannibal serenely read, Will was fucking confused. Did Hannibal not like reading by the fire with him? Was this book something he didn't want Will to know he read? Was Hannibal a secret 50 Shades of Grey fan? Will was roused by his thoughts by an alarm. Startled, Will stilled his body. Hannibal had taught him the proper response to a loud noise while stalking was abject stillness. Will used that advice now, taking slow, quiet breaths and controlling his heartbeat as he watched Hannibal turn off his phone's alarm. With a yawn, Hannibal got out of the car. The doctor sat his book on the driver's seat as he reached into the back, pulling out a leather toiletries bag. Settling the bag on the roof of the car, Hannibal took a moment to stretch his arms wide, neck rolling. Once properly limber, Hannibal sunk his hands into his hair and began ruffling the gelled strands. He pulled his bangs down first, and then began scrunching little tufts up in the back, and when he was finished, he looked as though he had been in a windstorm. Hair in a terrible state, Hannibal opened the leather bag. The glass bottle he pulled from its depths caught the streetlight, gleaming as Hannibal raised it to his neck and began to spray. The scent of jasmine floated towards Will on the breeze. Will knew his mouth was open. Jasmine-tainted air coated his tongue as he watched Hannibal apply a spritz to his groin before slipping the bottle back in his bag. He watched as Hannibal tucked and untucked his shirt, adjusting the angle to the exact level of debauchery he wanted. The doctor opened his shirt, making sure to skip over one of the buttons as he fastened it together again. He fiddled with his belt until it looked hastily fastened. Rummaging in the bag, Hannibal fished out a plastic packet. Will watched in awe as Hannibal Lecter, serial killer, and the toast of Baltimore society carefully applied press-on nails to his right hand. And when the nails were set, Hannibal raked his nails along the left sleeve, letting them catch the delicate material. Will blinked down when he saw the snag and tear. Hannibal looked down at his chest for a moment, considering. With a small purse of his lips, he wrapped his arms around himself, dragging the nails across his back. With nimble fingers, he plucked the acrylic nails from his hands, safely storing them in his back pocket. When he was satisfied with his artfully disheveled appearance, Hannibal dug into his kit again, producing a gold tube. The cannibal pulled off the top, and Will had to cover his mouth to keep from snorting. Hannibal applied the bright red lipstick to his bottom lip before lifting his collar to brush some of the color onto the fine shirt. When he was satisfied with the mark, he rubbed the rest from his lip, smearing his chin with the color. He looked bloody in the moonlight, and Will thought back to how red his lips had been when Hannibal tore into the dragon's neck and then swallowed him. The doctor retrieved a large hand mirror from his kit, studying the picture he had made. He looked as though he was debating another swipe or two of lipstick when Will turned his heel and retreated into the bush. Will knew he should be angry. He should be furious. And yet, I am careful not to make a show of leaving, seeming almost furtive as I go. I calculate exactly how much provocation will be needed to get the reaction I want, and I am not interested in wounded looks or hurt feelings. I am interested in rage, possessive fury from one monster to another. If Will won't allow me to woo him, then I demand he claim me instead. This is my design. Will could feel the grin stretching his face as he raced back to the house. Yes, it was the textbook manipulation that always annoyed Will, but there was something undeniably sweet about it. Hannibal hadn't given up on him. He just bought some perfume and tried again. Will slipped through the kitchen door, toeing off his shoes carefully on Hannibal's precious shoe mat, and replacing the boning knife in Hannibal's block. He tapped his lip. Hannibal had worked so hard to elicit a jealous rage in Will, it would be a shame not to give it to him. Hannibal would be back in a few minutes. Will needed to move fast. He pushed Hannibal's fruit basket off the counter, letting a mango roll into the foyer. The floral arrangement on the table was next to go. Will had always hated that vase, and he took great delight in throwing it into the hideous Leto painting that Hannibal had acquired at some godforsaken antique store in Santiago. Finally, Will grabbed a tumbler and filled it with Hannibal's best whiskey. Dipping his fingers into the glass, he flicked some of the liquor onto his shirt and face, enough to make the smell strong, before pulling a pull from the glass and gargling. He spat whiskey into the kitchen sink as he heard the lock turn in the door. He took a moment to form the scowl. It wouldn't do to smile and make his body loose-limbed. He leaned against the counter and waited. An elegant hand picked up the mango. Hannibal walked into the kitchen with a frown. Will? Where the fuck have you been? Will lurched forward, stumbling slightly as he approached Hannibal. I was out. With a friend. Hannibal's eyes grew bright as he watched Will's performance. You don't have friends. I have one, obviously. A small smile curled at the corners of Hannibal's mouth. Will threw his glass at the doctor's head just to knock it off his face. Hannibal dodged, surging forward to grab Will's wrist. You're drunk. You fucking stink, Will hissed, grabbing Hannibal by the hair and wrenching his head back. There was a small abrasion at the base of Hannibal's throat. Will wondered how the fuck he managed to give himself a hickey. I didn't know you object to the scent of jasmine. Hannibal sounded unbearably smug, but Will resisted the urge to smile. I object to you coming home smelling like your whore, Will snarled, pulling at Hannibal's collar and pressing his fingers into the hickey. Letting her mark you? What is to be done about it, Will? The empath ducked his head to hide his smile. God, Hannibal was impossible when he wanted to be. I'm gonna clean you up. Will's fingers tightened in Hannibal's hair. He marched the cannibal up the stairs. Hannibal offered no resistance. He caught the doctor smiling triumphantly as they passed the hall mirror. Will moved quickly past his own room, kicking open Hannibal's bedroom door and heading towards the bathroom. Will shoved Hannibal into the walk-in shower and turned the water on. Will! Hannibal plastered himself against the wall, trying to avoid the spray on his shoes and fine pants. Will leaned against the door of the shower. You should have thought about your fancy fucking clothes before she ruined them, Hannibal. Strip. Hannibal watched Will for a moment, his eyes glittering, before he stepped into the shower spray. He undid his shirt slowly, letting the sodden fabric fall to the tile. The doctor maintained eye contact as he toed out of his shoes and socks. Will tried to control his breathing. He hadn't really seen Hannibal naked since their wounds had healed, a sight he missed. He had missed the sight keenly. He flexed his fingers behind him, resisting the urge to touch, to worship. It wouldn't do to break character now. When Hannibal stepped out of his wet pants, Will allowed himself a scan of the cannibal's body. He bit his lip to keep from laughing when he noticed Hannibal had given himself a hickey just over the hip bone. Will grabbed a loofah and tossed it to Hannibal. Scrub. Hannibal soaped himself in lazy circles, letting the water slice the suds from the body as he turned, giving Will a show. The empath noticed how Hannibal's cock thickened between his legs as he worked. It was more than Will could bear. He stepped forward, grabbing the loofah from Hannibal's hands. He rubbed over Hannibal's body, feeling the firm flesh beneath his fingers as he worked. Soon, Will abandoned the loofah, letting it fall to the tile with Hannibal's ruined clothes. He dragged his nail through the soapy fur on Hannibal's chest, leaving little red trails through the suds. When Will's fingers dug into the muscles of Hannibal's back, massaging until he felt the muscles loosen between his hands. Hannibal turned, eyes bright and mouth parted, studying Will intently. He was fully hard now, his cock pressing against the wet denim on Will's hip. Will took a steadying breath, his fingers moving to the hickey on Hannibal's neck. You can't remove that with soap, Will. Hannibal's voice was barely a whisper. Will raised his eyebrow at the challenge before latching onto the base of Hannibal's throat and sucking. Hannibal gasped loudly, pushing into Will's mouth. His arms wound around the empath, grinding himself against Will's thigh. Will sucked and bit at Hannibal's throat, Hannibal trembling just beneath his hands. When Will released him, Hannibal looked dazed. Where else did she touch you, Hannibal? Hannibal panted under the shower spray. Will wanted to lick the rivulets from his cheeks. He wanted to curl into this ridiculous man and tell him how stupid they were for not doing this the moment they met. But that wasn't Hannibal's design. Hannibal. Will grabbed at the cannibal's throat, pressing the thumb into the livid mark he sucked into the skin. Where else did she touch you? Hannibal blinked, water dripping from his brow as he tried to process the words. Wherever you're willing to touch. Will spun Hannibal towards the door, turning the water off. He slapped Hannibal's ass, relishing the sound. Get on the fucking bed and don't dry off. Will moved immediately, leaving a trail of watery footprints across the precious reclaimed wood floors. Will took a few moments to look at himself in the mirror, and he gave himself a little smile. A big, goofy grin that sank his scar into his cheek and crinkled his eyes. He ran a hand over his chin, pressing his smile into his palm. When he heard the mattress creak, Will schooled his expression into barely contained fury. Tugging his soaked t-shirt over his head, Will stomped into the bedroom. Hannibal sat primly on the bed, his dripping hair soaking the headboard, ankles crossed. Though his face was carefully neutral, Will could see the smug gleam in Hannibal's eyes. Will would let him have his little victory if it meant having Hannibal. He grabbed both of Hannibal's ankles, yanking him towards the foot of the bed. Will thrilled at the genuine shock he was able to pull from Hannibal as he roughly climbed between his legs. Caging Hannibal's hand between his arms, Will allowed the weight to fall onto the doctor. Hannibal rolled his hips into the pressure, seeking friction from the wet jeans pressing on him. Will grabbed a handful of Hannibal's soaked hair and yanked, snarling when Hannibal rolled his hips again. "You don't fucking move, you hear me?" Hannibal's hips stilled. Will pulled harder on the hair, making Hannibal's lip curl. "Answer me." "Yes, Will." Hannibal watched Will with curious eyes. "Did you think I would allow this?" Will sneered. "How long did you think I'd allow you to come home smelling of perfume?" 3 years. Hannibal's eyes shone as his lips curled. "What?" Will's grip faltered. Hannibal surged up, just enough to bring his face to Will's. "For 3 years, I allowed Alana to taunt me with updates about your family, details of your wedding, how happy you looked with your false son, her guesses as to when you and the little woman would start trying for your own." Hannibal laid back on the bed, mouth thin as his jaw worked, chewing over the bitter memories. "I endured it all without hesitation, and when you returned, you smelled of your loathsome cologne. Yes, but even worse than your seafaring cologne, you smelled of Dove soap and drugstore face cream." Will moved his hand to Hannibal's jaw. He meant to grip his chin with angry fingers, but couldn't make himself, so instead he stroked softly over Hannibal's skin, eyes fond. "So this jasmine-laced tart was my reckoning?" Hannibal's eyes lowered. His chin fell solidly onto Will's hand. A reminder of how easily one scent can alter. All of Will's elaborate plans of jealousy-fueled sex were crushed under the weight of Hannibal's admission. He'd let the mask slip from his face as he examined the man below him, allowing himself to be vulnerable at the most inconvenient of times. "You crazy son of a bitch," Will muttered, dipping his head to press a light kiss into Hannibal's mouth. Hannibal's lips parted in surprise. "You're not angry?" Will shook his head. Hannibal squinted. "No." Will kissed Hannibal again, soft and seeking. He began rolling his hips until Hannibal relented and started moving with him. "You were furious when I returned home." Hannibal's voice was thin. Will watched as the doctor dug into his head into the mattress, arching his neck. "I was." Will ducked down to lick along Hannibal's carotid, tasting the rapid pulse that lay just beneath the skin. Hannibal's hands fell to Will's hips, stilling him. "I've never known you to forgive so easily." Will caught Hannibal's eyes, letting the contact go for a moment. "You never wanted to smell like jasmine, Hannibal. You only ever wanted to smell like me." Will smiled, his thumbs stroking Hannibal's cheeks. He thought about mentioning the ruse, trying to tease, but something flickering in Hannibal's eyes stopped him. He leaned down to rub his cheek against Hannibal's, enjoying the scratch of his stubble against the doctor's smooth skin. "It's forgotten, like she never existed." Hannibal tugged at Will's jeans, shoving until the wet material fell onto the empath's thighs. With a few kicks, Will had them off, the soaked material landing with a wet thud on the floor. If he didn't move them soon, they would soak into the wood and warp them. Will found he rather liked the idea of their house bearing scars of their love, just like their bodies did. Will took Hannibal's mouth again, sucking on the doctor's lower lip as he felt their wet skin slide together. Hannibal clawed at Will, nails digging into the soft flesh in an attempt to melt them closer. Slotted between Hannibal's thighs, Will shifted until his cock aligned with Hannibal's. The next roll of his hips had both men groaning. Will moved to suck on the delicate flesh below Hannibal's ear, bringing his hand to rest over the doctor's mouth. Hannibal licked the palm, pressing over his lips, and keened when Will moved it to wrap around both of their cocks. As Hannibal licked his hand, the feeling of the cannibal sliding against him became very overwhelming. Will began biting. The little crescent marks formed on the column of Hannibal's throat, one for every moan Will drew from Hannibal. The doctor's nails had sunk into the meat of Will's ass, drawing the empath closer with every thrust. There would be blood stains along his flesh in the morning. Will hoped they scarred. Will dragging his teeth along Hannibal's throat to breathe in his ear. "No more jasmine, only blood and food and me." "Yes." Hannibal clenched his hands, his thrust stuttering. Will's grip tightened. He could feel the pressure building in his balls. It wouldn't be long. "Say it, Hannibal." Say it for me." "Only you," Hannibal choked, his cock throbbing as it thrust against Will's palm. "I only want you." Will pressed his face into Hannibal's skull, drawing great gluts of Hannibal's scent into his lungs. Salt, sandalwood, and sex. It was almost the perfect scent. "Come on," Will gritted as he thrust harder against Hannibal. He was losing his rhythm as he grew closer to release. "Mark me, then." Hannibal's mouth found Will's shoulder, biting hard as he came in long, shuddering thrusts. Will pressed into the jagged mouth clamped on the shoulder, finally coming when he felt the skin break. The sharp aroma of copper found Will's nose as he gasped, face still buried behind Hannibal's ear. This was what he always wanted the cannibal to smell like, bathed in blood and passion for all eternity. After a few ragged breaths through his nose, Hannibal finally released Will's shoulder. He offered the mangled flesh there a lick before allowing his head to fall back to the mattress. Will watched the man stretch out like a great cat beneath him, sated and utterly relaxed. With a tilt of his head, Will released their cocks, pausing to drag his hand through their cum. He found himself smiling, slowly rubbing their spend into Hannibal's stomach and chest. The doctor arched into the touch, his eyes shining and his mouth curved. "We should clean this up." In a moment. Will brought his hand to Hannibal's mouth, his breath catching when the doctor lapped at the soiled fingers. His cock gave a painful lurch, trying to fill again. The doctor raised his brow at his sight. I wonder how long it would take to coax you back to hardness using just my teeth and tongue." Will moved off the bed with a sigh, holding out his clean hand for Hannibal. "I'm too old to play that game for at least another hour, Hannibal. Come on, let's clean up and go to bed. We can play it in the morning." Hannibal smiled, stepping over the wet pile of denim on the floor as he allowed Will to lead him to the bathroom. Will found that, ergonomically, Hannibal Lecter was an excellent pillow. The soft pelt of hair that wrapped over his chest made a snugly but firm place to rest his head, with just enough neck support. As Will settled, twining his arms around Hannibal's middle and nuzzling into place, he took a moment to tilt his head up and regard the man he'd spent the rest of his life with. Smug didn't begin to cover it. Hannibal was practically radiating in self-satisfaction, eyes blissfully closed, edges of his mouth curled at the superlicious angle. His right hand was embedded in Will's hair, stroking softly through the damp curls as if he were quieting a beloved pet, which he might actually think he was doing. Even his breathing was deep and profoundly arrogant. He'd made a plan and had executed it flawlessly. "So..." Will tapped his fingers innocently against Hannibal's soft middle. "You're done with Jasmine, right?" Hannibal opened his eyes and lifted his giant crazy brain off the bed to offer Will a terrible rendition of sincere remorse. "You'll never know the anguish I feel that I put you through that, Will. I promise I'll never leave your side again." "Good." Will offered Hannibal an innocent smile. "It was only a matter of time before one of the neighbors saw you spraying yourself with perfume and rubbing lipstick on your clothes. I'd hate to kill the whole development." Hannibal's superior smirk thinned into a mere line of flesh before he clenched between teeth. "Careful." Will raised his hand to tap on Hannibal's mouth where his lips should be. "You bite them too hard and you'll lose them. I'd hate to have to start calling you Chilton." Hannibal's lips re-emerged as he snarled, snapping at his teeth with Will's finger. Will evaded him easily, smile growing wide. "I think my favorite touch was the nails. We could even get manicures together. I had to leave before you made the hickeys. How'd you do that? Sandpaper? Did you have a little vacuum in that case?" Suddenly, Will's perfect snuggly pillow had turned to stone. It was also pushing him off the bed. "I think perhaps you'd be more comfortable in your own room tonight." Will latched onto Hannibal's middle, holding on for dear life. "You'd think that, but your mattress is more comfortable. Then I'll allow you to enjoy it by yourself." Hannibal managed to free himself from Will's octopus limbs, flopping out of the bed with absolutely no grace. Will tried to hide his laugh, but when Hannibal's head finally popped back up over the mattress, eyes blazing, he knew he hadn't muffled the noise quite well enough. Hannibal stood, taking a moment to run his hand through his sex hair before walking, straight-backed and completely naked, towards the door. Will let him march, marveling that a man could maintain so much dignity while his cock flopped back and forth in time with his gait. When Hannibal got to the door, Will sighed, kicking off the covers and stretching his naked body across Will's bed. "Fine, leave," he called. Hannibal turned on his heel to regard Will with a cool eye. "I'll just rub my neck with sandpaper for beard burn and spray cologne all over the house. Seems to work wonders." Will grinned, his scar stretching his cheek. Hannibal snarled, darting towards the bed and pinning Will to the mattress with an alarming force. Will's smile never faltered. Hannibal lowered his face to Will, sharp teeth glinting in the low light. "I'm afraid I can't allow that." Will raised an eyebrow. "Too jealous?" "No." Hannibal's snarl smoothed into a toothy grin. "Just intimately acquainted with your horrible taste in cologne." Will threw his head back, laughter filling the room. Hannibal kissed him quiet. The end.